I was once called the most evil, dangerous, Nazi psychiatrist, transphobic and homophobic. The boy with the smothering, overpowering mother, claustrophobic, then gets power over his mother by putting his mother on and taking his mother off.
Whoa.
Is why a lot of transvestites look like Hyacinth Bouquet. Autogynephilia is men who have this sexual fantasy of having female bodily parts. What you've managed to do is get your workplace to accommodate your sexual fetishes. I had one fetishist transvestite that his boyfriend would put him into a latex chamber with a vacuum attached to it, so it would...
Oh my God, imagine that.
The cross-dressers, a lot of them were fetishistic. The transsexuals were autistic. The BBC and ITV are the worst. The reason why pronouns are so important to autistic trans people is because 26% of my patients were post-operative regretters. There were no studies that show there's any difference between a transsexual brain and a non-transsexual brain. The interesting thing about Eddie Izzard, all I say is, from what I know from what he said himself, is that he never...
People have been saying, why, you've got to have Dr. Az, okay, why haven't you had him on, you horrible man?
Why haven't you had me on?
Well, because I've asked several times and you were busy. However, yeah, you've forgotten that. Tell me a bit about your background. What do you do? Who are you?
Okay, so I'm a consultant psychiatrist. I'm quite rare because I'm also a psychotherapist. So I do both. And I worked in the NHS for 15 years, now work completely privately. The thing that people know me for is I'm the only consultant psychiatrist in psychotherapy that specialised in treating gender dysphoria with psychotherapy. And I did that. I ran a specialist service in the NHS for 12 years. I don't treat it now because the climate is so difficult.
Oh, wow.
But I treat everything else. So, but that's what I'm known for. That's what all my research publications have been in.
I see. Okay.
Including this wonderful book.
It's wonderful. That's an early plug.
But you haven't read.
Yes, I haven't read.
Getting it is the first step.
I have the book, and I wasn't sure at what point you were coming on, and then I didn't get to read it because you have to read all these books. It's mad the number of people you interview, and how can you get through all
the top of the pile?
I'm reading Dawkins's new book.
No, the order's wrong.
Well, I'll tell him that when I have him on. When did you first start thinking, okay, what is going on here? I mean, did things start to suddenly change with regards to referrals and people coming to see you with gender dysphoria?
Well, if I hadn't done medicine, I was going to do fine art. And I couldn't decide. I got into both. And then the day before, I thought, well, I'll do medicine first, much to the relief of my parents. The other version of me would have gone to the Slade, done fine art, and I'd probably be one of those people on embankment selling pictures by the railings. Yeah. And having come from an art background, I thought, this thing about sex changes, I mean, this is amazing. We can actually change people's sex. I mean, how on earth is this possible? So I thought, this is bloody brilliant, this is. And my first job after I qualified was in plastics as a very junior houseman. And I was helping the plastic surgeons do the operations. And I thought, okay, well, this is clever that they're moving bits of the body around a bit like plastic surgeons do. But what's happening in their head? How are you changing their head? And I went into medicine to do psychiatry because I was always more interested in the mind than the body. And then when I went to psychiatry, nobody seemed to be thinking about it. And people were either not thinking about it or a small group of people in gender clinics were also not thinking about it. And I thought, this is a bit strange. And then I went to the Portman Clinic, which is part of the Tavistock and Portman. And I was there for 12 years, training and working in forensic psychotherapy. And we all had a different niche. Someone had specialized in paedophiles, someone specialized in shit fetishists, and incest. And my specialty was gender dysphoria. So I set up a service, which I ran for 12 years until I left. And it was a psychotherapy only service. So there was it was not attached to any gender clinic. So what I wasn't was a gatekeeper. I wasn't someone to say, oh yes, you can go and have this, you can't have that. So people could be completely honest, and it was basically a neutral exploratory space for adults who came saying that there was something wrong with their sex or gender. And that 12 years really informed my understanding of what it was.
Okay. And I suppose the next question then is, what is it?
Well, and if you think about the term trans, it's a really unhelpful term. It's an umbrella term. So you've got people that used to be called transsexuals who believe that they should be the opposite sex. There are a small amount of them. than a huge amount of what we used to call transvestites. Nobody talks about transvestites anymore. So the majority of people who we refer to as trans are transvestites. And they were either people who were fetishistic, so they cross-dressed and got sexually excited and would masturbate, or people who weren't overly sexually excited but were afforded some sort of advantage, like they felt more confident, or they, those are the transvestites. And a very small proportion were what we call autogynephiles or AGPs, which a lot of people in the gender critical group confuse with fetishist transvestites. They think that every man who's obviously a fetishist transvestite is an AGP, but they're not. Autogynephilia is men who have the sexual fantasy of having female bodily parts.
Okay, as opposed to fetish transvestites who have get arousal from the wearing the clothes.
So the transvestite is you know that you're the sex you are, but you get something out of putting on the external vestiges of the opposite sex. And analytically, there was a paper written years ago where they described the young boy who has a smothering, overpowering mother from whom he feels claustrophobic from.
Pink Floyd, The Wall. That's what that was about.
Was it?
Yes.
It was a transvestite though, was it?
Well, he was weird. And Roger Waters, it was all about mother, all his songs about his mum. And he has gone a bit weird.
Had long hair.
Yeah.
But so the boy with the smothering, overpowering mother, claustrophobic, then gets power over his mother by putting his mother on and taking his mother off at will. And there's that. So with perversion, with sexual perversions, there's always a root of trauma. And with trauma, you have a number of outcomes. Either nothing, or you get a bit upset and get over it, or you get something along the PTSD spectrum with nightmares and flashbacks, or very rarely you sexualize it. And by sexualizing it, you get dominance and power over what would otherwise traumatize you. There's no choice. You don't say, well, what am I going to do? It just happens. So everyone we saw, because the Portland clinic was basically a sexual perversion clinic. It still is. For every perversion, we saw a trauma at the root of it. So the putting your mother on and off again is why a lot of transvestites look like Hyacinth Bouquet, because that's what their mothers look like. I had one fetishist transvestite that would, his boyfriend would put him into a latex chamber with a vacuum attached to it. So it would, like one of those Tetra Pak, like those mackerel in Marks and Spencer's.
I think I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Like you're like that. Okay.
Yeah. And once he got to that stage and asphyxiating, then he would orgasm. So he was dressed up in a vacuum chamber in order to get orgasm. And if you took a history from him, as I did, when he was 10, he walked into the kitchen and found his mother dead with her head in the oven. So he had converted the trauma of the suffocating dead mother into putting his mother on and suffocating. And that was he didn't make the link.
Wow.
But there was such an obvious link. So with the fetishist, there's always a trauma. And the wonderful book by Dennis Nielsen, is it Story of a Drowning Boy? His autobiography that he wrote in high security prison before he died, and they didn't want to release it. But that's a wonderful description of how he came to end up collecting men to kill and then to keep and looking at them, because his original trauma was when he was taken to see his dead grandfather or uncle in state, lying in state after he died, and that traumatized him. And then when he was an adult, he picked up a man and he was lying in bed and he wanted that moment to last forever. So he killed him just so he could look at him, because that was his trauma. And that became sexualized into his necrophilia.
Wow. So how, and it sounds like it is, how empirical is this? How real is this? It sounds Freudian. I know nothing about psychology, but everyone is always saying, oh, Freud, oh no, he's rubbish and all of that. So how certain are we of this?
No, that's just a hypothesis, and some people fit into that, and some people won't. With fetishists, you usually can find a trauma if you dig deep enough that relates to their fetish. But with the cross-dressers, so a lot of them were fetishistic. The transsexuals weren't. The transsexuals were autistic. So what I found is that all my male transsexuals were autistic, and often they didn't really have a sexuality. They could have sex, but they weren't really into it. So if you have a sexuality, you get turned on by what corresponds with your sexuality, and you get disgusted by what's not corresponding with your sexuality. If you don't have a sexuality, you're sort of going through the mechanics. You don't really get it. You have a physical orgasm, which is why if you see people who've, say, changed sex, then they start fancying another sex, what they used to, it's probably because they're asexual. They're just going through the mechanical motions.
That's interesting, because I watched that show Love on the Spectrum. Did you see that?
I didn't.
Series in Netflix, and they set up. It's quite sweet, and they're very different levels of autism that everybody has,
Right.
and they set them up with others roughly on the same part of the spectrum as they are. But I got the impression watching it surprised me that many of these people. Well, one day they'd be out with a boy, then they'd be out with a girl, and I felt I've never heard any of them really go, "Oh, she's fit." Not that they were talking that way.
Well, that's what I'd ask them. I say, do you think they're fit? And they go, they talk about it as a nice piece of furniture. Oh no, I fancy them because they look nice. They've got long hair, and so it's not that erotic sense. It's more like, oh, they look pretty, they look nice. I like hanging out with them.
That's quite a mind-blowing thing that people don't talk about, really, that it could be that people on the spectrum don't experience...
Well, it depends how far on the spectrum they are. There's a massive spectrum. So what I found was, because 26% of my patients were post-operative regretters. So the trajectory that I saw as a pattern, which always seemed to be the case with the male transsexuals, was you start off with this autistic boy, and he doesn't know he's autistic, but he feels that he's different from other people. And he's aware that he feels different from other people. And he's frustrated by that. He doesn't know why. And then he searches for why am I different? And then he's introduced to the idea of transsexualism or transgenderism. And he has this hypothesis of this eureka moment of this must be it. This is why I'm not like everyone else. And the thing about autistic minds are there's no flexibility. They're very concrete, rigid. Once they get an idea, they're right, and you have to agree with them, otherwise have an autistic meltdown. And that's what you saw. And so they had this trans solution, which they think this is I'm going to be the woman that I should be. And then so there's a period of trans idealism, and then they have the sex change, and then there's a period of transgender euphoria. Wow, I'm this wonderful woman I always should have been. And then depending on the degree of autism, they would either carry on being happy, or if they weren't that autistic, they'd have this realization that, oh, maybe I'm not a woman. And their sense of inauthenticity of their self would return again full circle.
Did you know that in the UK, people are being arrested for what they post online? That's why I use today's sponsor, Surfshark VPN, your shield against the creeping control over your digital life. With Surfshark, your online activity is completely hidden. No one, not your internet provider, hackers, or even governments, can track what you do online. Your IP address, disguised. Your location, masked. And does the internet feel like it's missing half its content? From censored news articles to blocked streaming services, governments and corporations limit what you can see. Surfshark unlocks content from over 100 countries so you can browse the web like a citizen of the world. One subscription covers unlimited devices. Plus, Surfshark has a strict no logs policy. Your data isn't logged. It stays yours and yours alone. And here's the cherry on top. Surfshark Alert. It's like a watchdog for your digital identity, scanning for leaked personal information and keeping you ahead of data breaches. Right now, viewers of this channel can get an unbeatable price for an extra 4 months and a 30-day money-back guarantee. Just go to surfshark.com/heretics. Don't risk your safety. Sign up to Surfshark VPN.
How can a layperson such as myself differentiate from fairly afar? This person is a transvestite fetishist who probably had some trauma and gets some arousal and can only get arousal from dressing up that way. And this person is an autistic transsexual.
Well, the autistic transsexuals tended to want to keep a low profile, blend in, not cause a scene, not cause a fuss, and not be too flamboyant about it. Right. Whereas the transvestites were not so much. And there may be clearly something quite erotic about what they're wearing or sexual. And so the sexualized component is more evident. Like Jan Morris said, she just wanted to wear a bangle and a pair of jeans and just have long hair, and that was it. And live quietly in some seaside town or whatever it is. Whereas the transvestites might be more flamboyant. They might be wearing clothes more suitable for a nightclub throughout the day, or sort of sexy lingerie or something. There's something overtly sexualized about it.
So it would be fair to say Eddie Izzard is probably not on the autism spectrum.
I cannot comment on anyone I haven't had any professional dealings with.
Well, that's how I want to ask you about all celebrities and get you to comment.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bad luck there.
I've got a friend called Mehdi Mizard, and
The interesting thing about Eddie Izzard, all I'll say is, from what I know from what he said himself, is that he never used to say that he was a transsexual. He always used to say that he was a transvestite.
Right.
So now that we call everything trans, it's all an umbrella term. And that calling everything trans is misleading because the majority are transvestite, a small number of transsexual, but they're afforded the same response as if they were all transsexuals. I mean, an example is, I had a patient who said, and he was clearly a transvestite. We knew that he was. We worked that out. He thought he was a transsexual, but we worked out he was more of a transvestite. And he said, I've told everyone at work. I said, what have you told them? He said, I've told them about me. I said, but you're not quite sure about you yet. What have you told them? He said, well, I like dressing up as a woman. And I'm going to go into the office twice a week as a woman. I said, right, why? Oh, because I like it. And I said, well, the thing is, you've got them to believe that you're having a sex change at some point and you're transitioning into being a trans female. Actually, you're a man, you just like dressing up. So what you've managed to do is get your workplace to accommodate your sexual fetish. It's a bit like if you're some sort of sexual nudist, you wouldn't go to work twice a week naked. I mean, but because they're afforded this, this is a whatever. So it's very misleading for people.
Yeah, like going in and sitting at your office desk in the missionary position because it's just makes me
Absolutely,
comfortable.
yeah. And the driving licenses, when they changed where you can change your gender, the rules, they may have changed it now, but when it came out, the rules said as long as you dress up as the opposite sex for 2 weekends a year, you can have your driving license in that sex.
What?
Yeah.
What is going on? And why don't they speak to people like you when they make these decisions?
Well, some did, who knew who I was for those 12 years. And all my regretters and detransitioners said, when we were going through this, why couldn't we access someone who was challenging because my role wasn't to persuade people to do something, help them through it, or convince them not to do it. They were adults. They could do what they want. I just wanted them to think about it in a neutral space. That's all. The outcome for me wasn't whether they did or didn't have a sex change. The outcome for me was they'd thought about it and explored it thoroughly before they did anything. All the regretters, which were 26% of my patient population, they all said, why on earth could we not have someone like you who just said why and what? Because everyone just affirmed them. And what they said was, I had one person who worked for a public sector, of course, and he said he'd had a sex change middle age and then regretted it 10 years later. And he went back to his employer, his family, and his friends, saying, why on earth did you not say to me, what on earth what are you thinking about? What do you mean you're a woman? And they all said, because we were being supportive, because that's what you're meant to do. And he said, I wish they weren't supportive. I just wanted them to be normal because I was clearly confused and nobody was challenging it. So they do need challenge, but now you're not allowed to challenge them. You have to affirm them. And the thing about affirmation is it sounds nice because you're affirming, but it's actually quite toxic. It's the worst thing you can do. We don't affirm anorexics who believe they should be thinner still. We don't affirm suicidally depressed people that they should be dead. Yet we have people who are confused about something that have come to this erroneous conclusion that we then collude with.
Do those who actually go through the surgery and then might regret it, are those the autistic ones? Would I be right to assume that many of those who get the fetish, who have the fetish for it, the transvestite stuff, probably wouldn't actually go through with the cutting?
So a lot of them don't know the difference. So they just know, I like dressing up, maybe. And the autogynephiles who get turned on by the idea of having breasts and vagina, I mean, GP appointments are 6 minutes long, right? It's very hard to get out into that 6 minutes. Actually, I get turned on by them having a vagina. You just say, I think I need a sex change. And the autogynephiles that I've seen went to their GP, said, I think I should be a woman. And the GP said, we can refer you to, say, Charing Cross or one of the gender clinics, but there is like a 2-year wait. And And I think, oh, it's too your weight. So they then, Googled what the treatment would be, sex change. And they got themselves on a plane, usually to Bangkok, and had a sex change. Problem is, all libidinal sexual drive, if you're a man, comes from your testosterone. It comes from your gonads. The first thing that goes with the sex change is you get castrated.
Oh.
So you wake up from the operation going, oh shit, I've got a vagina. I don't want it.
Oh my God, imagine that.
That's the universal response when an autogynephile has a sex change. They wake up, they have no sex drive, and that was the only reason they wanted a vagina. And now they're left with this redundant vagina they don't want.
Which isn't, it's not even a vagina, is it?
It's more like a hole, like an apple core, a hole put between the base of your penis and your anus, which then you take the penis off and the penile skin lines the hole, and your scrotum is reorganized into the labia.
Because men, and I don't know how women feel sexually, but men have that moment when they've just ejaculated, and there's a moment that lasts anywhere from 10 seconds to 10 minutes or half an hour or days of just like, my God, what was I doing just before that? That's all horrible.
You're revealing a lot about yourself, Andrew. I'm
talking about other men. I'm going off of what you told me before we started about your personal life. No, I'm joking. But I weeks, years of no, I kid. But it lasts. It could be 10 seconds or whatever. But there's a moment of like, my God, who was that?
That's what they wake up with. Yeah.
And they've got that. But instead of just going, gosh, I regret having an affair. This isn't about me, by the way. I've been happily married, but I mean, regret or the naughty thing I did. That's a bit disgusting or whatever. But they've cut the willy off.
Well, it's the balls that are the problem.
Oh, well, it's all the problem. I mean, the balls are the problem for the testosterone, so it's not going to come back. That feeling will never come back again.
Well, if you give them exogenous testosterone, testosterone, it does come back.
Oh, okay. But then they won't be more womanly. And they don't have a willy anymore.
It's complicated, isn't it? Yeah. So you get lots of people who are misdiagnosed. So clinically they get misdiagnosed, but then the general public misdiagnoses them because they're just saying I'm trans, which could be anything really. And so all these men going into women's toilets, the ones that want to do it the most are the ones who want to get a kick out of it. And we've all seen all the clips on Twitter of this, excitedly, I'm in the women's bathroom again and I've got a raging hard on sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're all transvestites.
I see. And they are more likely to still have their appendage.
Well, yeah. I mean, most people who are trans have no intention of getting rid of their appendages.
Because those are the ones getting arousal out of it. And that is a fundamental issue. As you said before, are we okay as a society changing policy, changing birth certificates?
For fetishes.
For fetishes, yeah.
Yeah, and the birth certificate thing is weird because even if theoretically you could change sex, I don't think you can, you can't change a historical moment in time because the birth certificate says this happened on this date.
Yeah.
So if you're a man and then your 100th birthday you decided that you want to have a sex change, you could then change a historical document 100 years ago to say that you were born a girl. I mean, it's madness. I mean, everything to do with reality is being subverted.
It changes people's criminal records as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, the BBC and ITV are the worst, and Channel 4 actually, because they talk, and the police actually, they talk about women murdering women. Oh. Well, it was actually a man who's purporting to be a woman killing a woman. So all the statistics get skewed.
I had Kerry Lee Galvin on, and her dad abused her whole life, went to prison, said he was trans, and they all started calling her a her, gave her makeup and things that other women in prisons don't get, so extra rights to this person, and then changed his name to Claire Fox, to troll this Claire Fox who runs We're at the Battle of Ideas right now, and they don't have to. They're supposed to put on their criminal checks that they've changed their name, but they don't. There's nothing making them do that. So loads of them are doing that, and this guy has now been seen. Her dad, who we know is an abuser of children, hanging out in libraries, sitting around with kids, and doing all these things. And there's nothing showing that who he is and who he was. They just go, "Oh, it's a trans person. Let's all affirm them."
Because my first paper was trans, a case of the Emperor's New Clothes, and it was about this sort of turning a blind eye. And I first off started asking the question, are they delusional? Are they mad? And I said, well, no, they're not actually. They're just confused, misguided, and they're often autistic, and they've come to the wrong conclusion. The madness is everywhere around them. So in this system, there's a nodal point, which is them. They're confused, autistic, or whatever, but we're mad because our response to them is mad. And I remember when I was a junior doctor, there was one of our colleagues who, I won't say his name, but then he decided to come back the next year as a woman, and we all knew who it was, but we had to pretend it was a new person. And I remember the woman in one of the clinics said, "That new doctor looks really familiar. I can't put my head."
They said that.
Yeah. But there was this sort of collusion with this sort of false reality, which was a bit mad, but we were all doing it.
Did that person know they were doing that? Was it sort of almost facetious or helping, or did they actually say, "Who is that? Did they look like someone I knew"?
Yeah, they didn't know.
They didn't know?
No, yeah.
Well, maybe it was a really good sort of disguise.
Wasn't really.
No. Bloody hell. This was something that I thought it was great. It was asked on, I think, Radio 4, one of those. It was Kirsty Young, I think, asked Grayson Perry, do you think that the reason people take issue with you dressing the way you do and doing those things is that you're doing something that is part of your sexuality and people around you haven't consented to being part of your desire? And Grayson Perry, who's, for those who don't know, is a sort of a strange, eccentric artist who sometimes wears strap-on dildos to children's charities and things like that, actually said, yes, that's absolutely right. So he seems to at least be aware of what's going on. And it's very frustrating that we as a society have now gone, these guys...
If you look at pride marches, which should be called shame marches, that is full of people dressing up as dogs giving each other blowjobs on the streets. I mean, why is that okay?
I went once in Berlin to...
Oh, was it that thing, Folsom?
What's that?
Folsom, they're all having sex in the street all the time.
Oh, no, I didn't see that going
That's
on.
in Berlin.
But I did see that happening at Pride.
You went to Folsom in Berlin, didn't you?
I don't know what that is.
It's this annual sex fest on the street.
Oh, I thought it was Gay Pride where I was. They kept telling me, this is Gay Pride, Andrew, now put that thing in your mouth and do all those things. But I was there with my wife and some friends because we thought, this is a supportive thing for the gay community.
Some young children.
Yeah, well, it was there were families around, and I looked down to my right and there was a guy giving another guy a blowjob.
Oh, guy, right.
Yeah, well, they were just doing it on the floor, willies out and all of that. And it was quite a shocking thing to see sort of in real life, that. And I said that to Peter Tatchell, the gay rights activist. He's now a trans activist as well. And he just said, it simply doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. There is no... and I was like, well, at any pride ever? And he's like, no, it doesn't happen. What, that people have sex on the streets?
Pride's all about fetishists and trans now. It's not about gay people. Gay people get kicked out of pride marches if they show any allegiance to the LGBT alliance or anything like that.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
That's the thing. What sort of pushback have you had?
Oh, tons. So I think I'm in the top 10 kill list. And I'm lucky because everywhere I've worked, because I'm the only person in the field that does this, and I've written loads, I've researched loads and published loads, workplaces have been really supportive of me. I've been very lucky in that respect. So, and I work in a clinically sound way. I don't do anything harmful. All I do is think with people. But none of my patients I've ever seen have ever had a problem with me. And my patient used to say to me, "Why are all these people being vile to you online? Like, you're actually quite nice." I'm going, "Well, thank you." It's the idea of me that they don't like. So the idea that I'm giving people with gender dysphoria psychotherapy, that they think. So I was once called the most evil, the most evil, dangerous Nazi psychiatrist, transphobic and homophobic.
They've added transphobic and homophobic to the end of the sentence.
Well, I probably
misquoted
it, but I was all those things, which is quite an accolade. But I became totemic of what they hated was someone questioning. And if you're autistic, you do not want someone to question because if you don't agree with them, you hate them. So to challenge them is to be hateful. And then to another example of the autistic thing is the pronoun thing. I mean, people have gone pronoun mad. I mean, the pronoun was this lesser known part of grammar for years, but now it's pronouns taking over the world. But the reason why pronouns are so important to autistic trans people is because the main deficit of the autistic mind is not being able to envisage what someone else's mind is thinking. So they have to go on macro clues, like if you're smiling, you're happy. If you're frowning or crying, you're sad. If you're shouting, you're angry. So the transsexual person dressed up has no idea whether they're passing or not, whether you're reading them or not. So if I can get you to call me she and use she, her pronouns, and you say that, therefore you think that. So even though they can't police your thought, they can police your speech. And that's a roundabout way of policing your thought, because he's using she, her pronouns. So therefore he is seeing me and believing that I'm she, her. If you slip up, then you don't believe it. So it's a very teleological, very black and white way of a proxy understanding of what's happening in your mind. Because they don't get bothered about other bits of grammar, but that for them means you really believe that they are the gender that they want you to call them. So that's why pronouns cause autistic meltdowns if you get them wrong or right.
And then there's the they, them. That seems different.
So the non-binary thing. So we've seen a massive upspike in young people who are saying they're non-binary trans. Mm-hmm. What I say is it's a subculture. So ever since the Second World War, we've always had youth subcultures. And the point of a youth subculture is because it's the stage between accepting everything that the world is, as your parents tell you, to being an adult where you worked it out. So there's this teenage pubertal period of fighting against it, subverting things, turning it on the head, questioning, being a pain. And historically, up until social media, it was always based in music. So, bands formed the epicenter of your understanding of the world, whether you're a hippie, a rocker, rockabilly, a mod, punk, or like me, a goth. Not now, but some things don't change. And the whole point of it was to subvert things. So social media came around, and the focus of your identity was no longer in your bands that you put all over your pencil case and everywhere else. It was in your social media profile, how many likes you got or whatever. So now for the post social media generation, their music's just music. They're not that excited about music as Generation X were. And it's not that the subcultures are finished. They're still there, but Goth Mark 5, in my book, I talk about the different stages of goth. So I was Goth Mark 1, 2, and then Goth Mark 3 was more sort of like not just wearing black. Goth Mark 4 was emo. And then Goth Mark 5 is trans non-binary. And if you look at punks and goths and then non-binary kids, they all look the same. So you look at me when I was at school, I had, backcombed hair, more makeup than any normal female would wear. And I probably looked a bit like a transvestite, to be honest, but it was nothing about gender. It was got subversive and being a goth. And I always use this example. When Jenny turned up at school with backcombed hair and purple lipstick, we thought, oh my God, Jenny, you're so cool. What are you, a goth? Okay. Within 2 weeks, there was an epidemic of goths in this North Wales public school. And it wasn't that we'd caught it like an infection. It was a cool thing to do. It was a subculture. So when someone looking like Jenny turns up at school now, they go, oh my God, you're so cool. What are you? I'm non-binary trans. Then again, the whole school are. Again, they haven't caught it like COVID. It's just a cool thing to do. But in my day, the sensible thing to do was just humour you. So my parents were, happy that I was doing well in my A-levels. So was my school. And they turned a blind eye to the fact that I looked like some strange, Addams Family transvestite parading around. And that was the right thing to do. And they thought, I'll grow out of it. And I did to some extent. But the problem now is that kids are going, oh, non-binary trans. And their parents have seen, some documentary on Channel 4 or something. And they go, oh my God, you've got a medical condition. Oh. And then they're shuttled down this trajectory of the transgender route. And thank God for Cass doing the review. They would otherwise gone to GIDS, but now they're going to these places like Gender GP and just getting all these castration agents and hormones. And it's almost like castration is the new backcombing.
Wow. But it has much more significant ramifications.
Yeah. So if there was a goth identity clinic, GIDS, when I was a teenager, I'd have probably gone and had a permanent backcombed hair and black lips tattooed and whatever it is. But thank goodness there wasn't. You know?
You'd look mad.
Yeah, it wouldn't be a good look.
Gosh. Okay, so that's worrying. That's the social contagion aspect. But also,
You're mistaking a youth subculture for a medical disorder.
because unfortunately, it is, at least by language, linked to that disorder. Because the kids themselves are
We
saying
haven't
trans.
suddenly had this massive influx of trans people. There's been cool. I mean, name me any other youth subculture. It's the coolest thing possible at the moment. And also, if you're a bit of a geeky, autistic kid, and now you're celebrated and the coolest kid in the school, I mean, it's quite rewarding.
I guess I mean that because there's the social contagion aspect of it, and it's it's actually got nothing to do with trans, right?
No.
But because
But
of the language
it can
used,
develop into. But if you've got people medicalising you, putting you on puberty blockers, so you never have puberty, then it will reinforce the idea that you're not really a boy or not really a girl because you're not developing like everyone else, and it becomes wish fulfillment. It becomes a iatrogenic thing.
I used to put a bit of eyeliner on.
Did you put it on the inside or just the outside?
Inside, which is that's that's
you're
hardcore. That was hardcore. Inside looked a bit better, I thought.
Did you put it with the eyeshadow as well on the top lid?
I did. I don't think I did that.
With the eyeliner on your finger and like that?
Did you do that?
Yeah.
But the thing, I think when I was a bit younger, because probably the girls I grew up around got me wearing bronzer and stuff, which is not goth and cool at all. No,
I was doing the opposite. My mother was saying, "Is this foundation pale enough for you?" My favourite sentence was, "Are all the boys wearing lipstick at 3 o'clock in the afternoon?"
At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, lipstick. That's great.
If it was after 7, it's fine.
I had hair straighteners. Used to straighten my hair, and I'd put the eyeliner on. And sometimes, if bronzer, and there'd be a bit of foundation, and because it starts with the concealer.
You were trans then?
I think I was. I didn't even remember doing this till we started talking. Actually, I just remembered my teenage years. I was doing that.
Repressed memory.
It repressed it because it was horrible. It was because there's that stick that you can put for spots, to hide your spots.
Oh, not a styptic pencil in barbers, not that.
No,
concealer stick.
Concealer.
Yeah,
concealer. And everyone at school would notice because it was a boys' school. The other boys, and you go, "Oh, you've got concealer on, mate," and that person would go bright red. And then you've got to put bronzer on to hide you going red and all of those things. A lot of the boys were all doing that. But the straighteners and the eyeliner was later because that was more, I like the Killers and Green Day and all of that stuff. So, but
you're not that young.
I'm not that young. I'm 35.
When the Killers were around?
I was university.
Oh, okay.
I was sort of 18. I was about 18 when the Killers. I think the Killers' first album I was probably 17, 16. Don't know. Jenny was a friend of mine. That was their first song. Then you talked about it. Exactly. I was thinking about that. Bloody hell. Okay, so this is
my
an
soundtrack.
What do you say?
This should be my soundtrack.
It's a great song. Do you remember that song? Do you know that one?
Yes, I'm not that old.
Oh, what a song that is. Oh, but because it was on the album, it wasn't I think it was a single, but it wasn't like Mr. Brightside or one of those. A lot of people, another thing Peter Tatchell said to me, the only trans activist I can get to come on the show, so that's why I had to go back to Tatchell quite a lot. But is
You're
that...
not tempted to have Fred Wallace?
Oh God,
I think he's wandering outside at the moment.
He is. I think we're at the battle of ideas, and Fred Wallace is a sort of infamous trans activist and a trans person, probably a transvestite, who has been sort of taking the microphone from people and getting into trouble and has had to leave. But a lot of these people say they have proved. The scientists have proved that there is something different in the brain of the trans person that makes them like women for men. Yeah,
that's another trans fact, which is as opposed to a real fact.
Okay.
So the whole point about queer theory is that you can queer or turn upside down reality and reinvent reality. And I did my master's in group analysis and transsexualism, and used Judith Butler and queer theory as the basis for it. So I chose upon myself to read the complete works of Judith Butler.
I'm so sorry.
I know.
Have you finished yet?
The thing is, I've always understood that a clever person can communicate in a really easy to understand manner.
Yes.
And if anyone is going out of their way to be complicated, you're kind of hiding something. And if you're clever enough, you communicate it in a way that you know the mindset of the person. Or maybe he's autistic. The mindset of the person, so you can communicate the way that, like doctors do.
Or if you weren't utterly possessed by ego. There is some ego in that highfalutin language, isn't there?
Yeah. So, I noticed one sentence was 2/3 of a page long. Literally, no joke. It was one sentence. I thought that can't be possible. You should be able to breathe.
Yeah. It's bad writing.
But her first book, Gender Trouble, I actually thought it was brilliant.
Right.
And then she wrote Bodies That Matter, where she completely contradicts what she said. And in true queer theory tradition, she queered everything she'd written in the book before. So Gender Trouble, one of the things that's really useful to take home from Gender Trouble is she talked about the difference between a transsexual, a transvestite, and a drag queen. And I asked my medical students this, and they can never answer it, obviously. But the difference is the transvestite and the transsexual are very adherent to what they perceive the gender rules are. Men do this, women do this, and they stick to those rules. They're slavishly adherent to those rules and persecuted by them. Mm-hmm. The drag artist is much more advanced. They're going, you think these are your rules for what a woman is? I'm showing you how ridiculous your framework is. So there's something more advanced in the drag mind, because they're not ridiculing women, which is what people get wrong. They're ridiculing the gender framework.
Okay.
They're ridiculing what you believe gender is, because gender is like religion. It's a man-made organization of thinking and beliefs. It's not real. Gender is not real. If gender's doing a head-in, then don't worry about it. Don't believe in it. It doesn't exist. Biological sex exists. Gender is like a religion. Just be a gender atheist. If it's bothering you that much.
Yeah. And so, have you seen the studies they're talking about?
They're all nonsense. So there are no studies that show there's any difference between a transsexual brain and a non-transsexual brain. Some early studies were flawed because they were looking at brains which had already had exogenous estrogen given to them.
Oh, you're kidding?
Yes. So there is absolutely no evidence. By very definition, there cannot be a biological basis for it, because otherwise it would be like an intersex condition or disorder of sexual disorder. So there has to be no physical basis for it to be trans. It's purely in the mind. It's the only mental thing that we treat via the body.
God. I had assumed that what was really going on, I was trying to imagine what's gone on here. They've got these papers, and whenever I had a proper look at them, all it seemed to say was there was something different in the brain. It wasn't that they were more like women or more like men. It was just different. And I thought, well, maybe there's just more depression or more autism.
It's a trans fact. Like if you don't affirm your child, then they'll kill themselves. That's a made up, horrible, nasty, fake fact that they spurt out that silly social workers and other activists bleat out repeatedly, which encourages people that they should kill themselves if they're not affirmed. The other nonsense fact is the 1% regret rate.
Yes.
Nobody is followed up.
Because you said 26% of your patients.
Yes, so my patients are a certain sample. So my patients are people who come to the clinic wanting therapy. So that's a skewed sample. But none of my regretters, so 26% of my patients were regretters, none of them had been followed up ever. So when I asked the gender clinics, why are you not following them up? They said, because we've given them what they wanted. They're free to live their lives. And then GIDS didn't follow anyone up. So I invented an outcome measure. So in medicine, you have outcome measures to measure how useful your intervention is. So I had this research team when I lived in Australia, part of my midlife crisis, and we developed a questionnaire which takes about 15 minutes to do, self-report, and it measures how confused you are about your gender and how stable you are in it, irrespective of what that gender is. It's not measuring how male or female you are. You could be like genderqueer or whatever it is. It's not asking what your gender is. It's whether how stable you are and how happy you are. And that could be used as an outcome measure for any trans intervention, whether it's psychology, surgery, hormones. And so we invented a wheel that hadn't existed. We sent it to GIDS. We sent it to all gender clinics, saying, we've invented the wheel for you. It's free to use. I don't want any money. It's free. Not one of them replied. And I repeatedly wrote to the chief executive and medical director of the Tavistock, never replied. And I mean, that's strange because the CAS report criticized them for not collecting data. I've given them the tools, but they don't want to use it.
Is that still going on now? They still won't use it? They won't?
Yeah.
It really feels like, I know a lot of people...
The tools in my book, the end of the book, we did an adaptation for children. So it's called the GPSQ for adults, Gender Preoccupation and Disability Questionnaire, and the GPSQ2 for children and adolescents. And in Australia, the gender clinicians, many of whom are my friends, they piloted it out for the whole of Australia. And it's valid, reliable, we published it. But yeah, they won't use it.
That's insane. People say that it's a bit of a religion. It's taken the place of religion. It's a cult.
It's a new religion.
This is what happens when you email the Catholic Church or Jewish community or whatever it is and say, hey, your rabbis, your priests, your imams are doing these things, they wouldn't reply to you. And that's what's happening to you now. Bloody hell. And that's the Detrans. So that 1% is a myth. It's because it's not being followed up. I mean,
It's a myth. It's a made-up fact. And for example, there are lots of people who are post-operative trans who try and cultivate the notion that they were never the opposite sex, and they try and erase history. And it's almost like, if I can convince everyone around me to believe something, then it must be true. Because in a democracy, the majority is right. So if I can convince everyone that this is reality, then this is reality because they're the majority.
Gosh.
And they do that on an unconscious level. And there's an activist who was a doctor and is a female to male trans and denies ever being female. Yet, if you look at old Twitter posts, there's her showing off mastectomy scars. So, very interesting.
Just liars, I think. I mean, that's just lying, isn't it? And so we don't actually know the percentage who regrets, and we never really can. And also, I've heard that whenever people, like when Ritchie Herron, who was a guest on this podcast,
he's written a chapter in the book.
Oh, right,
amazing chapter. He's really
great.
Really raw.
He's such a good speaker, and raw.
Brilliant.
That doesn't surprise me. Well, that's fascinating. And he said, he went back, and they didn't want to know.
So they don't want to know, and a lot of mine said, we don't want to go back because we spent years convincing our GP, our psychiatrist, the gender clinic to give us what we wanted. It's too embarrassing to say, actually, I was wrong. So they don't want to go back. And a lot of them say, what's the point going back? Because they can't stick it back on. They can't change it. So most of them choose not to go back. But they're not followed up with questionnaires or how you're doing. And, I was seeing these people every single week, some of them for 10 years, which is more clinical contact than any other clinician had with them. And I had one who, after seeing me for a year, was completely fine being a man. But he still goes to the gender clinic twice a year. I'd get a letter from the gender clinic referring to him in this female name and saying how happy he was living in this trans role. And I'd say, it's a bit weird. I'm getting these letters from the gender clinic that referring to you in your previous sort of female name and saying you're happy being a woman. And he said, and this was brilliant, he said, we all know I'm happy being a man, but there was a part of me that wanted to be a woman. And now that lives on in the minds of the gender clinic because they believe that I'm living as a woman. And it was almost like this sliding doors other reality. And he was happy being a man, but the unrealistic fantasy of being a woman was now living in the mind of the people in the gender clinic. Even though it wasn't relevant to him, he liked the fact that there were, in some reality sphere, in someone's mind, he was.
So he was happy to keep them thinking that.
Yeah. He went twice a year dressed up and convinced them so that in their reality, he was that version.
Wow. Okay. So, I
had another one who's a post-operative person who spent all his day on Facebook having conversations with other people, all of whom were people which were him.
Oh, he was talking to himself?
Yeah, and different personas, different characters.
What, like opening a new tab for each one?
Well, I didn't go into that much detail, but yeah.
Well, you must have asked, how were you doing this? Well, maybe not, actually. You're talking to yourself.
I mean, the fact that he was talking to himself was enough for me.
Was that schizophrenia?
No. It was just creating different realities.
Well, I suppose it's like a diary, or in your creative.
So in the other person who was him's mind, they believed that he was whatever, or she was whatever, or
Okay, I see.
So the manipulation of reality, either in your mind or someone else's mind, even if someone else's is also yours.
Do you see the sadness of it? Do you see people who want to detransition who are coming to you and they can't because you can't stick it back on, and it must be difficult to sit with these people?
So when I started, there were two colleagues who were retiring, and by chance, one of them had run a post-operative regretters group, and one was running a pre-operative group. And the pre-operative group were all very euphoric and idealistic and unrealistic. And the post-op group were in a constant state of mourning. So one was really depressed, one was really unrealistically happy. So I thought, this is a bit of a false division. Why are we dividing people based on whether they've chopped their genitals off or not? So I mixed them together, and it worked really well. That was the perfect formula, because you had people who were idealizing about this Bond girl that they were going to be. And then you have the detransitions going, hang on a minute, you sound just like I sounded 10 years ago. Honestly, it's not like that. And because the analysis was done by the whole group, they weren't just waiting turns for smarty pants as to say something. It was analysis of each other. They would say, hang on a minute, you sound like me, but you sound completely mad. And coming from each other, that's fine and more powerful than coming from a smarty pants me.
That's how you de-radicalise, isn't it?
So the winning formula, I always said, is a analytic group with a mixture of pre-op, post-op regretters, detransitioners, autogynephiles, and transvestites, because there's so much overlap, and let them do the work with a conductor who's neutral. And it's just about thinking. And in the 12 years that I did it, less than 2% of my patients went on to have any medical, physical interventions.
And what would be a typical number?
Typical number?
Typical percentage of people who want to have it done?
Well, no one knows, but these are all people who started off thinking they did.
Okay. Yeah,
So 98% didn't.
A lot of parents will be listening to this, and you're absolutely right. I mean, in any kind of culture circumstance, you want someone who's part of that in-group who might regret it, but parents don't really have access to a detransitioner to speak to their kid. What can they do?
Get them to read the book. I mean, literally a third of this book are the life stories from the people themselves who've changed their mind. The thing about schools is the only training that teachers get are from captured organisations like Mermaid and Stonewall. Mm-hmm. And I talk to parents, and unfortunately, the worst schools for being captured are the private girls' schools, because the state schools come under Ofsted, and Ofsted were being quite sensible, trying to stamp out all this nonsense. But the private schools don't come under Ofsted. And I had a patient whose daughter was in a very, very, very reputable girls' private school in London, and she was saying, I'm telling the school not to refer to my daughter as he, but they're refusing. But if it's any consolation, she's sitting next door to someone who identifies as a cat. On her left, on her right, there's a pterodactyl. And, the idea that you've got a biology teacher that's affirming someone as an extinct animal is ridiculous. But they are, because they're just, once teachers start colluding with you, then everything's gone bonkers.
That's right. And that's historically been right, hasn't it? I mean, Maoist stuff, you talked about the different types.
You've read Mao, but haven't read my book.
What?
You've read Mao, but not read my book.
I haven't read Mao. As if I've read Mao.
Well,
I've hardly read anything. I've watched movies that seem to have things that reflect what happened in Maoist China. But I will read your book. But I didn't know you were coming on, and you and my guest booker were going back and forward. Yeah, but it was all like, I don't know what time, when am I going to get lunch? Right. We've talked about different types of trans, autogynephiles and transvestites who get a bit of a kick out of it, autistic people. What is going on with those young women at private schools, for example? Because is that also a case of not wanting to grow up because of how they're being sexualized?
There's the two main things that you've got to look at, or three main things with gender dysphoria, are autism, homophobia, and also the subculture stuff, and trauma. That's four things.
Okay, so that trauma fits into...
Yeah, so for females, yes, there's a lot of autism. If they're just young kids, it's often it's a cool thing to be non-binary goth thing. But a lot of it is lesbophobia. And if you talk to these young people who are girls, who are attracted to girls, and you say, "Oh, so you're a lesbian then?" "No, I'm a trans man." "Oh, do you know lesbians at school?" "No." "Do you know any famous lesbians?" "No." "Do you know any trans men?" And they reel off all these trans male influences, and they see programs like My Tea Diaries on children's BBC, converting this miserable, otherwise lesbian into this superhero, strong, hairy, trans male. And, would you rather be this thing called a lesbian, which they don't know what it is, or this big, strong trans male? So there's grooming on that front. And I blame the BBC and ITV, all the main channels, because they are massively grooming children. There's all this sort of pro-trans ideology everywhere, but there's nothing critiquing it. There's nothing challenging it. And they're led to believe that, if you like these sorts of things, maybe you should be a man. So Yeah, I think there's a big gap for lesbian positive role models.
This is an issue with what you say about the BBC. I mean, I was in a panel yesterday at the Battle of Ideas about the problems of social media and social media versus the mainstream. And there are absolutely problems with social media. Of course there are. I mean, there's lunatics with huge followings. There are people trying to hide sex crimes while they were celebrities by going religious and going all woo-woo and all that kind of madness. And at the same time, if you only had the BBC and ITV and all of that there would be nothing pushing back against what you're talking about.
Even like, one of the things I hate about the BBC and ITV and Channel 4 is that they've erased the term. I much prefer the term homosexual to gay. I mean, if it's fine to be heterosexual and bisexual, what's wrong with homosexual? Let's de-awfulify it. Homosexuals would be fine. I mean, gay sounds a bit like a weird brand of jumping.
Do they not say homosexual anymore?
They don't say gay anymore either. So you will not hear them refer to a gay person. They're always LGBTQ people.
Or queer.
Well, BBC is more LGBTQ. And I hate the idea of everyone being grouped together. It's like saying coloured chap or foreigner. Be specific. If you mean again, and they're talking about things where there were no T people around. Like, if you're talking about things involved in the First World War, there weren't LGBTQ because there weren't any T's in the First World War.
Well, all I'm told is that in the Second World War, that's who Hitler was trying to get. It wasn't the Jews, it was the transsexuals.
They didn't have any transsexuals.
They were all killed.
The first one was 1966, Christian Jorgensen.
Well, apparently they were all killed by the Nazis, and it's only taken this long for them to repopulate.
Well, that's another trans fact that's not really a fact.
Yeah, it does seem to be the case. I've got another question for you, but where can people, I mean, it's an obvious question, but where can they get your book, Detrans?
Amazon.
Yeah, get it on Amazon, people. And who's a heretic you admire?
The thing is, I wouldn't see them as heretics. I see them as sensible people.
Well, sure.
So I'd love to take for dinner J.K. Rowling, Jordan Peterson, and Douglas Murray.
Well, you're in luck. I've got the... Come in. Those are great heretics. People, please go and follow Dr. Az Hakeem on Twitter, social media, all the things, and get Detrans. I've got it at home. I've got it right here as well. So please do. He's absolutely brilliant, and go and get his book. Support him. Spread the message. Spread this word. Hit the like button. Keep watching this channel.